everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Adam Minsky, a Forbes senior contributor and an attorney who specializes in student loans. Adam, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
On the 4th of July, President Donald Trump signed his nearly 1,000-page domestic policy legislation, the Big Beautiful Bill, into law. And you wrote for Forbes that in this package, we are seeing an unprecedented student loan overhaul. So it doesn't really sound so beautiful for all of those student loan borrowers out there. So big picture here, what are some of your takeaways? What exactly does this mean for borrowers?
Yeah, so there's a lot of major changes. We're talking some of the biggest changes to student loan programs that we've seen in a generation. The bill would limit repayment options, including for current borrowers. It would repeal several popular, affordable, income-driven repayment plans, including the pay-as-you-earn plan and save, and limit borrowers to just a few options. It would also restrict borrowing for new borrowers and new students going forward and provide even more limited availability of affordable payment plans for new borrowers as well. So big changes both for people already in repayment and for students who are going back to school in the coming years.
So let's talk about a little bit those changes to income-driven repayment plans because they're phasing out most of the options by, I believe, July of 2026. And they are replacing them. One of the options introduced in the legislation is called the repayment assistance plan. What is that? How is that different to other income-driven repayment plans that people were using before?
Yeah, so all income-driven plans operate at a basic level in a similar way. They use a formula based on someone's income. Payments are recalculated periodically, and if you don't pay off your loans in full, you can eventually receive loan forgiveness. But of course, the differences between all these plans are important. What the bill does is it repeals the SAVE plan, pay-as-you-earn, and ICR, which stands for income contingent repayment. Current borrowers who are in repayment now would still be able to access the income-based repayment plan, but that means that they might have higher payments than what they were paying under those other plans that are getting repealed. The bill, as you mentioned, also creates a new plan called the Repayment Assistance Plan, or RAP for short. RAP may have lower payments for some borrowers than IBR, but it may also have higher payments for other borrowers, particularly those with very low incomes. And RAP also would force people to be in repayment for longer, up to 30 years, before they could qualify for loan forgiveness. So even though you might have somewhat lower payments, you would have more years in repayment, which could drive up the overall cost of that plan.
And let's say I'm in college right now, I'm getting an undergrad degree. What are some of the differences I'm going to see when I took out some loans maybe last year, maybe this past year, and then next year? What are some of those biggest differences?
Well, so first of all, any borrower who takes out a new loan after July 1st, 2026 will be limited only to two repayment plans, either a standard plan, which will have a different length of a term depending on how big your overall balance is, or RAP. New borrowers who take out new loans starting next year will only have access to those two plans. There are also some new borrowing limits that are coming into place. There are new Stafford loan limits. In addition to that, they are capping Parent Plus loans as well, which is a type of loan issued to parent borrowers to help pay for an undergraduate child's education. They're capping Parent Plus borrowing at $65,000 in total.
And just how drastic of a difference that is, because as you said, it's not even just impacting students, it's impacting the parents as well. So there's a cap on those Parent Plus loans. What does that mean for a parent, really?
Well, so what it means for families in general is that there's just fewer options to fund the cost of higher education. With Stafford loans capped and Parent Plus loans capped, those limits are probably not high enough to cover the entire cost of attendance. And so that means that families are going to face some tough choices. If you can't pay out of pocket, do you turn to riskier, often costlier private student loans? Do you go to a different institution altogether? It's going to put people in a bind, unfortunately.
And so now let's turn to graduate students. What changes are they seeing when it comes to student loans because of the big, beautiful bill?
Yeah, so some significant changes there. So the bill eliminates entirely a federal program called the Graduate Plus program, which is a type of issue to graduate and professional students where historically borrowers have been able to borrow up to the total cost of attendance. Now, to kind of offset the elimination of that program, the bill does increase the cap or limit on Stafford loan borrowing for graduate students, but that cap is unlikely to be able to cover the total cost of higher education associated with programs like a law degree or a medical degree. And so, again, you're going to be putting people in a position where if they can't pay out of pocket and federal student loans aren't sufficient to cover the total cost of education, they might have to turn to costly, risky private student loans or not get that degree at all. And some professional groups have warned that this could aggravate or worsen existing shortages in certain areas, like doctors working in rural areas or public defenders or prosecutors as well.
So let's talk about that. I mean, point blank, should people be going to graduate school right now? I mean, how much is this going to burden them? How much is this going to change their life? This type of student loan overhaul from last year going to graduate school to now the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, I think a lot of people are going to be making very difficult choices. I'm hoping it doesn't drive people away from getting that advanced degree. In many cases, degrees that we need people to get to fill, doctor shortages and public defender shortages and prosecutor shortages. But the reality is, if people don't think they're going to be able to repay their student loans, they're not going to go get that degree. They're not going to take out those loans. And so I think, for people who are considering going, back to school for an advanced degree, we really have to figure out, how are you going to cover that cost? Are federal student loans going to be sufficient? If not, is it worth it? Because private student loans don't qualify for programs like income-driven repayment. They don't qualify for programs like public service loan forgiveness. And so relying on private student loans can be a really risky thing for people to do.
I want to talk about that a little bit more because when you're thinking about funding your higher education journey, it's really an investment. You're paying a lot of money in hopes that down the line you're going to have a career that can pay that off. Now that investment just got a lot more expensive for a lot of borrowers. You're saying there are some options now. People could turn to more costly, more risky private loans. Why are they much more riskier than a federal student loan?
Well, private student loans typically have higher interest rates than federal student loans. They also have fewer repayment plan options. There's typically no such thing as a long-term income-driven option. Those types of loans also generally don't qualify for loan forgiveness programs, including for public service loan forgiveness. And there's just less flexibility when things go wrong. If you lose your job, if you get sick, there's less flexibility to lower the payments or postpone the payments or get rid of the debt entirely. And that means it's easier to default on those loans. And that can really wreck someone's life in terms of credit damage and collections. So, turning to private student loans is truly a risky thing for a lot of folks to do. And many people, understandably, I think, just may not want to take that risk.
And you said in one of your pieces for Forbes on the student loan impact in the Big Beautiful Bill, there is some good news for borrowers when it comes to public service loan forgiveness program. What's the good news there?
So the good news is that the bill leaves the public service loan forgiveness program. So in other words, it doesn't repeal it, doesn't really change it. Borrowers can continue to maintain access to that program. However, the Department of Education separately is pursuing changes to regulations in part to implement President Trump's executive order issued to limit PSLF to certain organizations. That process is separately moving forward, even though the bill itself leaves PSLF intact.
I know at the beginning of the conversation here, you said that these changes really are unprecedented when it comes to student loans. Do you think there are any unintended consequences in the long term when it comes to these actions against student loans? Are we going to see less people pursue a degree? Are we going to see less doctors, less lawyers in this country because people might second guess, hey, can I really afford to do that right now when I have less options to pay that loan back? What do you think that looks like? A, and B, does this change the landscape of higher education in this country forever?
I don't know if it'll change it forever, but I think it is going to do a lot of what you just suggested in terms of driving people away from higher education and these advanced degrees. If people think that they aren't going to be able to afford, the costs and the risks. I do think we're going to see fewer doctors. I do think we're going to see fewer professionals as people, decide, maybe this isn't worth it. I also think we're going to see, spikes in defaults, for current borrowers if they're not able to access affordable payment plans. Many people, including a lot of Parent Plus borrowers, I think, are going to not be able to afford their payments. Doesn't mean that this is going to be this way forever. We could see more legislation in the future that makes positive changes. But I think, the big takeaway here is that this really is the first time in history, as far as I'm aware, that we've seen such a wholesale, taking away, benefits from people and programs from people who otherwise would have relied on them. And I think that that is going to impact, you know, schools. It's going to impact families. It's going to impact these professions, and frankly, all of us as a result.
To that point, then, do you think universities are going to do anything differently to navigate this time? Do you think they might bring down the cost of tuition? Do you think they might provide more scholarships? How do you think they'll go about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is, we just don't know. I think, different schools might handle things differently. I think it depends in part on what, each individual school's underlying, financial situation is. I think that, we might see, a dip in enrollment, across the board. And I think that that could hit smaller schools or schools that are on shakier finances a little bit harder. I think one of the arguments in favor of some of the changes in the bill is that maybe it will bring down, the cost of tuition, the cost of higher education. Maybe that's true, but I think it might also limit the options borrowers have or students have in terms of the schools that they attend.
Adam, I know that when you're 18, the price tag of college doesn't even seem real, right? And you're taking out these loans. You think, you know what? I will pay this back later. I'm going to have that flashy job. I'll be able to pay it back month by month. Then you graduate college and, that number becomes really real, and then it's a different story. I'm curious what you would tell people as an attorney who really works with student loans, right? If they are going to college now, whether it be undergraduate or graduate, they haven't gone yet. What is your advice to those borrowers now in light of these big, beautiful bill changes?
Well, as an attorney who works with, students and families after they've graduated, after they've taken on this debt, and after they often encounter problems with it, I can tell you that, no school is going to be worth, destroying your future or your financial well-being. I think that, there's no shame in going to a local school, state school, a community college, to keep your costs low. There's no shame in living at home for the first year or two. I think that, at least my generation, was brought up to, you go to the best school that you can get into. It'll be worth it in the end. And I think, younger people are starting to rethink that mentality. And certainly I think the passage of that bill will amplify that, yeah, even further.
And so then on the flip side, let's say you're a borrower right now, you've already borrowed your student loans and now you're paying them back. What are some of the action items right now? Because as you and I have discussed, some of the student loan overhaul in the big beautiful bill, that's not coming down until July of 2026 and beyond. So what should you be doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think now is a really good time for people to assess their situation. What repayment plan are you on right now? Is that plan going to stick around? Several plans are being phased out sometime between 2026 and 2028. Other borrowers may have to take action before that. For instance, some Parent Plus borrowers might need to consolidate their loans prior to to July 2026 in order to essentially be grandfathered into any income-driven repayment option. So I think, now is the time to take a look at what plan are you on? Is that plan preserved? Basically, if it's not income-based repayment or standard plan, it might be going away. What does this new RAP plan look like for you? Is that something worth, possibly considering once it's officially launched? And, are you done with your school, or are you going to be going back to school or taking out new loans next year or beyond? In which case, you got to be really careful because doing that could further limit and restrict your options. So I think the good news out of all of this is that a lot of the changes are not necessarily immediate. Borrowers have time to kind of look into things. And I would strongly recommend that people do that before they're put in a situation where they have to make a decision under pressure.
Adam, you certainly gave a lot of good information here for borrowers. I always appreciate your expertise on the subject. Thank you so much for joining me. And until the next time, Adam Minsky.
Thanks for having me.